The wind swept low across the Texas plains that evening in 1887, carrying with it the scent of rain and the whispers of ghosts long gone. The town of Laredo Creek sat quiet under a burnt orange sky, its wooden signs creaking, its saloon lamps flickering to life like watchful eyes in the dusk. From a distance, a lone rider approached, his horse dark with dust, his coat heavy from travel, his eyes shadowed with the kind of silence that comes from too many regrets. His name was Elias Crow, once an outlaw, now a man trying to live straight in a world that rarely forgave. He had left the gunfights behind, left the bounty on his name to fade with the years. He worked cattle now for Old Man Remington, kept to himself, and prayed that his past stayed buried beneath the dust he rode on. But even the quietest man in Texas can't hide from whispers. And lately, those whispers carried a name: Clara Vale. He'd first seen her at the town well, fetching water with a scar running down her cheek, the kind that told a story words never could. Folks said she came from the borderlands, that she'd lost her family in a raid. She never spoke much, just looked out toward the horizon like she was waiting for something that never came. Elias didn't mean to care, but he did, maybe because he saw the same emptiness in her eyes that used to haunt his own reflection. The sun was near gone when 3 riders came into Laredo Creek that night, trouble men from across the ridge. They carried the look of men who'd tasted blood and liked the flavor. Elias knew that look too well. They rode straight to the saloon, spurs clinking like a bad omen. By sundown, word had spread, they were looking for Clara Vale. Elias stood outside the blacksmith's shed, the hammering echoing like thunder, and listened to the talk. They said Clara had once been married to a smuggler, that she carried something valuable, something men would kill for. He didn't know if any of it was true, but the tone in those men's voices told him enough. This wasn't just gossip. It was a hunt. Later, as he led his horse down toward the riverbank, he saw her again. She sat alone near the water, the moonlight cutting through her hair like silver thread. He thought of saying something, but before he could, she spoke, her voice low, carrying the kind of sorrow that breaks a man more than bullets ever could. She said she didn't belong here, that the world had no place left for her. And when she turned her eyes to him, he saw something that caught his breath, fear and hope tangled together. He told her she didn't have to leave, that Laredo Creek was quiet and safe enough for a soul looking to start over. But she shook her head. She said the world never stays quiet for long. And she was right. The next morning, the saloon's doors burst open with shouting. The riders were back, this time with more guns. They called Elias's name. They called him an outlaw. They said he was hiding Clara Vale, and if he didn't hand her over, they'd burn the town to the ground. Elias stepped out from the shadows, the morning light sharp across his face. He wasn't that man anymore, he told himself. But his hands still remembered the weight of a revolver, and his heart still knew what it felt like to protect something worth dying for. One of the riders sneered and spat in the dirt. "Don't die for her," he warned, voice dripping with mock pity. "She ain't worth your name." Elias's jaw tightened, and for a long second, no one breathed. Then, slow as sunrise, he said it, the line that would burn into the memory of every man who stood there that day. "Living ain't worth less." The air cracked. It wasn't just a retort, it was a promise. He turned toward the edge of town, where Clara stood frozen by the well, her eyes wide, a hand pressed to her chest. Behind her, dust was rising, a storm of men and fate riding in hard. And Elias Crow, the man who had once outrun every devil he'd ever met, knew the past had finally caught up. But this time, he wasn't running. Not for gold, not for glory. For her. The sound of thunder rolled in not from the sky, but from hooves pounding across the plains. The story of Laredo Creek had just begun, and the ghosts of the Old West were about to wake once more. The sound of hooves echoed through the narrow main street as Elias saddled up his mare, a gray with eyes sharp as flint. The townsfolk stayed inside their homes, shutters drawn tight, hearts thudding behind wood and glass. No one wanted to be seen when men like those came calling. The 3 riders from the ridge had brought company 6, maybe 7 now, all armed, their eyes scanning every door like wolves scenting blood. Elias cinched the saddle and glanced toward the well. Clara stood there still, the wind catching her shawl, her face pale under the morning light. She didn't cry, didn't plead, just watched him with that same lost calm that had drawn him in from the first moment. He tossed her his spare coat. "We ride," he said. She hesitated, looking back at the town that had given her a brief, borrowed peace. But she didn't argue. She stepped into the saddle behind him, and together they rode out past the blacksmith, past the church, past the saloon where the outlaws waited to follow. The plains stretched wide, a sea of gold and dust under the rising sun. The wind cut through them, biting and dry, but Elias didn't slow. He knew the trails, every dry creek and hollowed canyon between Laredo Creek and the border. But he also knew those men wouldn't quit easily. He had once been one of them, the kind that didn't understand mercy, only bounty. By noon, they reached the edge of the Red Rock Ridge, where the land twisted into cliffs and ravines. Elias dismounted, scanned the horizon, and pulled his Winchester from the saddle. "They'll follow," he said. "They always do." Clara looked at him then, her voice soft but steady. "Why help me? You don't even know what I've done." He paused, thumb resting on the rifle's lever. "Don't have to know," he said. Seen enough broken souls to recognize one. They made camp by an old cottonwood, its roots reaching deep into the dry earth. Clara cleaned a shallow wound on her arm, a scar from a blade. She said the men were after something her husband left behind, a ledger, full of names and deals worth killing for. She didn't have it, but they didn't believe her. Elias listened without a word, the firelight flickering across his face. When the sun sank low again, the desert turned to rust and shadow. Far in the distance, a flicker of light, torches, maybe 3 or 4. They'd found the trail. Elias kicked dirt over the fire. "We move," he said. Clara's breath trembled, but she nodded. They climbed the ridge under moonlight, the rocks cutting against their boots. A coyote howled somewhere in the dark, echoing off the canyon walls. Clara stumbled once, and Elias caught her hand. For a moment, their eyes met, fear, trust, and something softer hidden beneath. She whispered, "You don't even know me." He answered quietly, "Don't need to. I just know what it's like to be hunted." The night wore on, the stars dim behind passing clouds. By dawn, they reached a narrow pass that overlooked the dry valley below. Elias tied the horses and took position on the ridge, scanning the open land. The outlaws were there, 5 now, riding fast. He could see their dust trail snaking like smoke. He looked back at Clara, her hair tangled, her eyes tired but fierce. "There's an old cabin down that way," he said, pointing east. "Follow the ridge, stay low. You'll find it by sundown." She stared at him, realizing what he meant. "You're staying. Somebody's got to buy you time." Her hand trembled as she touched his arm. "You'll die." Elias's lips curved into something between a smile and a confession. "Maybe. But I died once already, back when I stopped caring." He stepped away, rifle in hand, dust swirling around his boots. Clara called after him, her voice cracking. "Why me?" He didn't turn back. "Because you deserve someone not afraid to stand still for once." Down below, the riders grew closer, the sound of hooves beating like war drums. Elias knelt behind a fallen log, chambered around, and watched the horizon light up with the first rays of sun. He felt calm, not the kind that comes from peace, but from a sense of purpose. The first rider appeared, rifle glinting. Elias took a deep breath. The desert held its breath with him. When the shot rang out, it echoed across the valley like thunder from the heavens. The chase had begun. Elias Crow fired twice, clean, steady, deliberate. The first shot found a horse's flank, the second struck the dust near another rider's boot, spooking the beast and sending man and saddle tumbling. The echo rolled down the valley, scattering birds into the morning sky. He ducked low behind the log, counting the seconds between shots. 6 men, maybe 7. He'd hit one, scared too, but they'd regroup fast. That's what men like them did. He knew it because once he'd ridden under the same banner. The old rifle was slick in his hands, familiar as an old friend. Each click of the lever sang with memory, train jobs, bounty runs, and blood spilled for men who never deserved loyalty. Elias had walked away from that life, thinking he'd buried it under sand and time. But the desert had a way of digging up the past. He spotted movement, a tall rider with a black hat, calm amid chaos. Elias squinted, breath-catching. He knew that stance. That slow, deliberate reload. Cole Maddox. The name hit him like a ghost's whisper. Maddox, his old partner, back from the days when they called themselves the Crow Brothers, though they shared no blood. They'd ridden together for 5 years, split more gold than they could carry, and once promised to die side by side. But promises in the West were as brittle as dry grass. Maddox had betrayed him, left him to hang for a job gone wrong. Now here he was, leading the hunt. Maddox raised a hand, signaling the others to spread out. Elias ducked as a bullet bit into the log near his head. Splinters flew, dirt stung his cheek, but he didn't flinch. He waited, patient, calculating. The kind of patience only a man who's lost everything learns. Another shot, closer. Elias rolled, fired back, and clipped the edge of a man's hat. The rider cursed, retreating behind a rock. For every bullet they sent, Elias sent 2. He wasn't trying to win, just to delay. Every second meant Clara was one step farther toward the cabin. Down below, Maddox's voice cut through the smoke. "You can't run forever, Crow." Elias shouted back, "Ain't runnin'. Just cleanin' up old business." Silence fell for a heartbeat, broken only by the wind whispering through dry sage. Then Maddox's laugh, low, dangerous. "You always did have a death wish." "Guess I still do," Elias muttered under his breath. He shifted position, crawling through the brush toward a higher ledge. The sun was climbing fast, burning away the mist. He took a deep breath, aimed, and squeezed the trigger. Another horse dropped, chaos below, shouts, scrambling boots. But Elias was no fool. He saw Maddox move out of sight, circling left. He was being flanked. He slid down the rocks, boots scraping, heartbeat steady. He knew these ridges, every hollow and shadow. He'd buried men here once, long ago. Maybe he'd join them before the day ended. Then, faint in the distance, he heard it, the sound of a horse's gallop, light and desperate. Clara. She hadn't gone far enough. Elias cursed under his breath. He turned and ran, faster than his body wanted, pain lancing through his shoulder where a stray bullet had grazed him earlier. He climbed, breath ragged, until he saw her, a small figure against the red sky, her shawl whipping in the wind. Behind her, 2 riders had broken off from the main group, closing fast. Elias raised the rifle, but his hands shook. He steadied his breath, muttering an old prayer to no god he trusted. One shot cracked through the air, hit the first rider square. The second turned, startled, giving Clara a moment to steer her horse down into the narrow ravine. Elias fired again. Missed. The rider spun, saw him, and returned fire. The bullet tore through Elias's side, hot as fire. He stumbled, dropped to one knee, grit in his teeth. Blood soaked through his coat, but he gritted out a laugh. "Still standin'," he said softly. The second rider turned tail, vanishing over the ridge. Elias pressed his hand to the wound, his breath shallow. He didn't have long. By the time he reached the ravine, Clara was waiting with her horse, panic in her eyes. "You're bleeding," she cried. He waved her off, forcing a grin. "Ain't the first time." "Elias, please." He cut her off, voice low, steady. "Listen. There's a cabin just east. Keep going till you see the oak tree. You'll find a river there too, the same one I used to camp by years ago. Water runs deep. You'll be safe." Her eyes shimmered with tears. "I'm not leaving you. You have to." He leaned close, his breath ragged, but his tone fierce. "They'll come for you till the desert runs dry. But if you keep moving, maybe someday they won't remember your name." She whispered, "And what about yours?" Elias smiled faintly. "Ain't worth rememberin'." Then, faint on the wind, came the distant thunder of hooves again, Maddox's men regrouping. Elias looked east toward the sunrise, then back at her. "Go," he said. Clara hesitated, then leaned forward, pressed her hand against his cheek, and whispered, Don't die for me. He met her gaze, tired eyes softening. Livin' ain't worth less. She rode off, the sound of hooves fading into the wind. Elias turned back toward the ridge, rifle in hand, blood trailing in the dust behind him. He knew this fight wasn't about her anymore. It was about a man trying to prove, for once in his cursed life, that he could do one thing right. The sound of hooves drew closer, steady, deliberate, no rush in them. That's how Elias knew it was Maddox. The man never hurried, not even to kill. Elias crouched behind a fallen pine, bleeding through his side, the dust turning red beneath him. He wiped the sweat and grit from his brow and chambered another round. The ridge was quiet now. The echoes of gunfire had faded into the distance, leaving only the moan of the wind and the far-off cry of a hawk. Elias's breath came slowly. Pain was there, sharp as barbed wire, but he pushed it aside. He'd learned long ago that pain was just another kind of company. He glanced east. Clara was gone good. She'd done as told. If luck held, she'd be near the cabin by now. Maybe she'd find water, maybe a moment of peace before the world came crashing again. Elias hoped she'd never have to look back. But he couldn't leave it unfinished. Not with Maddox still riding the same dirt. The sound came again, boots on gravel, soft, sure. Maddox's voice followed, slow and familiar. Never thought I'd see you again, Crow. Elias pushed himself up, leaning against a rock, rifle in hand. Didn't figure you'd have the nerve. Maddox stepped into view, coat billowing in the wind, revolver hanging low on his hip. He was older, leaner, but that same smile, sharp and hollow as still cut through the dust. You always did have a talent for making trouble out of nothing, Maddox said. Elias spat blood into the dirt. And you always had a talent for selling out the ones who trusted you. A faint grin. Trust? You remember what that cost us? You, me, the boys, we rode hard, took our chances, lived free. You're the one who threw it all away. Elias shook his head. Freedom ain't worth a damn when it's paid for in blood. They stood a few paces apart, two ghosts of the same past, staring across the years that had turned them into strangers. The air was heavy, charged with something that wasn't just hate, it was grief, too. Maddox tilted his head. You protectin' that girl? Elias said nothing. Maddox's tone hardened. She ain't who you think. Her husband worked for the same folks we did once. She's got the ledger, Crow. Names, debts, and men who'll burn the world to bury it. She doesn't have it, Elias said. Maybe she doesn't. But they think she does. And that means anyone riding with her's got a death sentence. Elias's jaw tightened. Guess I'll take that ride. For a long moment, neither man moved. The wind kicked up, carrying with it the smell of gunpowder and dry earth. Somewhere, a tumbleweed drifted across the ridge, slow, aimless, like time itself waiting to see which man would draw first. Maddox's fingers brushed his holster. Last chance, partner, he said softly. Walk away. Pretend we never met again. Elias looked him dead in the eye. You and me both know walkin' away's the one thing we never learned. The world went still. Then a flash of steel. Both men fired near the same breath. Two shots cracked the morning wide open. Dust exploded around them. Maddox staggered back, clutching his shoulder, his revolver clattering to the dirt. Elias stumbled, a fresh wound tearing through his thigh, but he stayed upright. They stared at each other, breathing hard, bleeding, alive out of stubbornness. Maddox laughed, ragged. You always were too damn stubborn to die properly. Elias raised his rifle again, hands shaking. Ain't dead yet. But before he could fire, Maddox spoke, softer this time, almost human. They'll keep comin', Crow. For her. For the book. You can't stop 'em all. Elias's grip faltered for a moment. He knew Maddox wasn't lying. There were bigger men behind this, ones who'd never show their faces. Maddox knelt, coughing blood. You should have stayed gone, partner. Elias's voice came low, steady. Maybe. But a man's gotta live long enough to fix what he broke. He turned, limping back toward the ravine, leaving Maddox slumped in the dust. Behind him, the desert swallowed the sound of the dying man's breath. Each step was pain, each breath a battle. But Elias didn't stop. He had one promise left to keep, that Clara would see another sunrise. By the time he reached the lower trail, the sky had turned orange, bleeding into purple. He found Clara's horse tracks leading east, still fresh. He followed, half stumbling, half dragging himself through the sand. And somewhere in that dying light, he began to remember the man he used to be, not the outlaw, not the ghost, but the one who still believed that love, in all its misery and madness, could make a man worth saving. The desert wind carried the scent of rain. Rare. Holy. Maybe a sign that not all storms were meant to destroy. He pressed on, leaving behind the past or whatever pieces of it hadn't already bled into the dust. The sky turned bruised and heavy by the time Clara reached the cabin. It wasn't much, a leaning structure of split logs and rusted nails, half swallowed by weeds, half forgotten by time. The door creaked as she pushed it open, the smell of dust and old smoke filling her lungs. Inside, the air was still. Cobwebs hung like lace across the rafters, and an old rocking chair sat by the cold hearth. She dropped her bag, heart pounding from the long ride, and peered through the window. Nothing but the endless stretch of plains and the first flicker of lightning far in the west. She whispered to herself, "He'll find me." He has to. Her hands trembled as she poured water from her canteen into a rusted pan, washing the blood from her sleeve. Every time she blinked, she saw him, Elias, standing tall against the ridge, defying death like it was just another sunrise. She'd met men before who claimed courage, who talked about honor, but never one who lived it so quietly. Thunder rolled, slow and deep, shaking the old walls. She found a box of matches, lit a fire, and crouched close to it, hugging her knees. The warmth felt good, but it didn't ease the ache gnawing at her chest. She reached into her bag, pulling out a torn scrap of paper. It was the only thing she'd taken from her husband's old desk before the night everything fell apart. A page from a ledger, names, numbers, dates. She hadn't known what it meant then, but now, under the firelight, she saw something that chilled her blood. One of the names written there was Cole Maddox. Her voice caught. He knew. She turned the paper over. Another name. Faded, but clear enough to read, Elias Crow. Her breath froze. He'd been part of it once. Whatever her husband was mixed up in, Elias had been there too. She dropped the paper into the fire, watching it curl and blacken until the ink turned to smoke. The storm outside broke open. Rain hammered the roof and wind howled through the cracks. Then, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of hooves. Her heart leapt, and she ran to the door. The rain made the world blur, shapes and shadows twisting in the dark. Then she saw him slumped in the saddle, his coat soaked through, blood dripping from his sleeve. "Elias," she cried, rushing into the storm. She reached him just as he started to fall, catching him under the arms and dragging him toward the cabin. He was heavy, half-conscious, his breath ragged. Inside, she laid him near the fire, pulling off his coat. His shirt was torn, crimson soaking through the fabric. "Don't you dare leave me now," she whispered, her voice shaking as she pressed a cloth to the wound. Elias stirred, eyes fluttering open. He tried to smile. "Guess I took the long way round." She laughed through tears. "You shouldn't have come back." He winced, breathing hard. "Didn't have much choice. Ain't good at leavin' folks behind." For a while, neither spoke. The fire crackled, the rain roared, and thunder grumbled like an old god. Clara worked in silence, cleaning the wound, her hands trembling as she sewed the torn flesh closed with shaking fingers. When it was done, Elias lay back, pale but alive. His voice came low. "You find that cabin easily?" "Followed your directions." He smiled faintly. "Guess I ain't lost my touch." Then her tone changed, quiet but sharp. "Why was your name in the ledger, Elias?" His eyes opened, weary but clear. He didn't lie. "Because once I rode with men who thought gold was worth more than souls. Your husband was one of 'em. We worked for the same devils, till I couldn't stomach it anymore." She looked away, the fire reflecting in her tears. "And now you're saving me from the mess you helped make." Elias's voice was rough. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe this is what redemption looks like." The The storm outside reached its fury, lightning flashing so bright the walls glowed white for an instant. Clara sat back, exhausted, her eyes never leaving his face. After a long silence, Elias spoke again, softer. "You know, there was a river down by the old trail where I used to sit after a job. First time I ever thought about leaving the life. I watched the water move, steady, patient, like it didn't care what men did above it. I wanted to be like that river. But I never figured out how." She smiled faintly, brushing a wet lock of hair from her face. "Maybe you just did." Elias closed his eyes, his breathing slow, but even now. The firelight danced across his scarred hands, across the lines of a man who'd seen too much and still found the strength to care. Outside, the rain softened. The thunder rolled farther away. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes howled, not in hunger, but in mourning. And inside that lonely cabin, a wounded outlaw and a hunted woman found something neither of them had known for a long time, a kind of peace that comes only when the running stops. The morning came gray and quiet, the kind that feels like the world's holding its breath. The storm had spent itself in the night, leaving behind a silver mist that clung to the earth. The cabin roof dripped steady, each drop marking time against the silence. Elias stirred by the fire, wincing as pain pulsed through his side. The wound was rough but clean, Clara's work. He looked over and found her sitting by the window, watching the fog roll across the field. Her hair was tangled, her eyes shadowed from lack of sleep, but there was something fierce in her stillness, like a wild creature daring the world to try again. "You ain't slept," Elias rasped. She didn't turn. Couldn't. The storm, it sounded like gunfire. Elias gave a faint chuckle that turned into a cough. "Yeah, storm's got a way of bringing back ghosts." She glanced at him then, half smiling despite herself. "You've got plenty of those, don't you?" He nodded slowly. "Enough to fill this whole damn ridge." He tried to sit up and hissed through his teeth. Clara was at his side in an instant, steadying him. "You shouldn't move yet," she said. "I can't afford not to." He looked out the window. "They'll keep coming. Maddox might be gone, but the kind of men we ran with, they don't quit easy. Not when money's on the line." Clara bit her lip, fear flickering behind her eyes. "Then what do we do?" "We move again," he said quietly. "Head south. Maybe find a way across the border before they catch the scent." She hesitated. "And if they already have?" Elias looked at her, really looked. "Then we make our stand. Together, if you're willin', Dot." For a long time, she said nothing. Then she nodded, slow and sure. "I'm done running too." Elias managed a faint smile. "That's something, Dot." The morning wore on, the mist lifting as the sun climbed. Clara stepped outside to gather kindling, boots sinking in the damp earth. The air smelled clean rain and sage and ash. She breathed it in deep, almost forgetting what it felt like not to be hunted. But peace never lasted long in the west. From the ridge above, a flicker of movement caught her eye. Just a shadow, maybe, or maybe something worse. Her gut went cold. She dropped the wood and hurried back inside. Elias saw her face and didn't have to ask. He reached for his rifle, groaning as he swung his legs to the floor. "How many?" "Couldn't tell. One, maybe two. Could be scouts," he said, loading a round. "They'll watch first, then move in once they're sure." Clara's voice trembled. "Elias, I burned the ledger page, but what if they think I still have the rest?" "They do," he said simply. "And they won't stop till they see proof you don't." She swallowed hard, eyes darting toward the door. "Then we show them proof." Elias frowned. "What are you thinking?" Her gaze hardened. "We draw them here. Make it look like we're set in up camp, like we're cornered. Then when they move in, we take the advantage." He raised a brow, surprised. "You ever done this before?" She managed a thin smile. "No, but I lived with men who thought they owned the world. I learned how they think." Elias grinned despite the pain. "Reckon you might just survive this after all." They worked in silence, Clara scattering ashes from the fire outside to make it look like fresh smoke, Elias checking his rifle and setting traps along the narrow trail leading down from the ridge. Every movement was slow, deliberate. Both knew one mistake could end it. By noon, the the mist had thinned into a dry heat. The plains shimmered like glass, and somewhere out there, the enemy was watching. Elias leaned against the cabin wall, sweat running down his temple. "If I don't make it," he said quietly, "you keep riding. Follow the river south till you see the old train line. Folks there don't ask questions." Clara shook her head. "Don't talk like that." He looked at her, steady and tired. "Ain't talkin' like nothin'. Just set in the world straight in case it tips over again." She stared at him for a moment, then reached for his hand. "Then you'd better stay alive to make sure it doesn't." For a heartbeat, the world was still, just two souls breathing the same air, the fire crackling low between them. Then came the sound they both dreaded, a branch snapping outside, soft but sure. Elias's eyes narrowed. He raised the rifle. "They're here." Clara's heart thundered in her chest. The air grew thick, electric. Shadows moved beyond the door. And as the first bootstep hit the porch, Elias Crow whispered, "Stay low." The door burst open. Gunfire tore through the quiet morning, the smell of powder filling the cabin. The door splintered inward under the weight of a boot, the wood exploding into shards. Elias was already moving, instinct, not thought. He fired once, twice. The first shot slammed into the doorframe, the second caught a man's shoulder and spun him out into the mud. "Down," he barked, and Clara dropped, rolling behind the table as the next barrage of gunfire tore through the walls. Dust rained from the ceiling. Every bullet punched through the logs like the fists of an angry god. Elias ducked low, chambered another round, and listened. He could tell by the rhythm, two men up front, maybe one circling the back. He shifted his weight, pain tearing through his side, but his hands were steady. A shadow flickered in the window. He fired. The glass shattered, and a man fell against the frame, his hat tumbling off into the dirt. Then silence, that tense, unnatural silence that means the fight isn't done, only waiting. Elias's breathing slowed. "You all right?" he called out. Clara's voice came from behind the overturned table, small but strong. "I'm fine." He nodded to himself. "Stay there. No matter what happens." Outside, the wind picked up again, whistling through the bullet holes. Then came the crunch of footsteps circling around the back. Elias turned toward the door, eyes narrowed. "They're flankin'," he muttered. Clara looked up. "What do we do?" He gave her a wry grin. "We make 'em think we're dead." He grabbed an oil lantern from the shelf, lit it, and tossed it toward the back corner where old rags lay piled. Flames licked up fast, smoke curling toward the roof. "When they come in for the kill," he said, "we take the back door." Clara's eyes widened. "But the fire won't burn faster than we can move. Trust me." It wasn't a promise. It was hope disguised as certainty, and it was enough. The flames spread quickly, heat pushing against the air. Elias waited until he heard the crunch of boots again, heavier this time, closer. Then he motioned toward the rear door. "Now." They burst through into the sunlight, ducking low, the wind catching the smoke behind them. The hillside opened wide, golden grass, rocks, and the long stretch of nowhere. Elias staggered, but didn't stop. Clara followed, clutching the rifle he'd handed her earlier. Behind them, the cabin roared as the fire took hold. Gunfire cracked again, bullets kicking up dirt near their feet. Clara turned, fired once, the recoil nearly knocking her down, but the shot hit true. One of the pursuers fell, and the others hesitated just long enough for Elias to grab her hand and pull her behind a ridge. They slid down the embankment, the world spinning with heat and dust. Elias's wound reopened, blood soaking his shirt again. He fell to one knee, gasping. Clara knelt beside him. "Elias." He waved her off. "Keep moving. They'll be right behind. I'm not leaving you." He looked up, pain and pride warring in his eyes. "You remember what you said in that storm? Don't die for me? Well, the same goes for you." Clara's voice broke. "You saved me, Elias. I won't watch you throw that away." Before he could answer, a voice called out from above, calm, too calm. "Crow, you're running out of ground." Elias froze. He knew that voice. Deeper than Maddox's, colder. A voice from another lifetime. He turned his head slowly and saw him, Marshall Boone, once lawman, Now mercenary for hire. The kind of man who turned justice into business. Boone stood on the ridge with 3 riders behind him, rifle in hand. "You've been hard to find," he said, almost admiring. "I figured you'd be bones in a canyon by now." Elias wiped blood from his mouth. "Guess I disappoint easily." Boone smirked. "You always did. Maddox said you'd come for the girl. Told me you'd rather bleed out for a stranger than walk free." "Don't speak his name," Elias said, voice cold. "Fine," Boone said. "Let's talk about hers then." "Clara." Elias stiffened. Boone nodded toward her. "You didn't tell him, did you?" Clara's eyes widened, fear flickering through her. "Stop," she whispered. Elias looked from Boone to her. "What's he talking about?" Boone chuckled. "She ain't no widow, Crow. Her husband's still breathin'. And he's the one who hired me to bring her back, ledger and all." The world tilted. Clara's lips parted, but no words came. Elias's heart felt like someone had driven a nail through it. "Is that true?" Tears welled in her eyes. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is," he said quietly. Boone cut in, loading his rifle. "You can swap love letters later. Hand her over, Crow, and maybe I'll let you walk away this time." Elias rose to his feet, slow but steady, raising his rifle in answer. "Walkin' away ain't my style." Boone sighed. "Didn't think so." The standoff began, wind howling through the grass, thunder grumbling again in the far-off clouds. For rifles against one wounded man and a woman with shaking hands. Elias glanced at Clara. "Get behind the rock," he whispered. She hesitated. "Elias." "Do it." She moved just as Boone gave the order. Gunfire erupted. Elias's world turned to smoke and sound. The recoil slammed into his shoulder, the air filled with grit and thunder. He dropped 1 rider, maybe 2, couldn't tell. Pain burned hot and fast through his side, but he stayed upright. Through the chaos, he heard Clara's cry, raw and desperate. He turned, saw her pinned behind the rock as Boone advanced. "Don't move," Boone shouted. "I'll kill him first." Elias raised his rifle again, blood running down his arm. "You'll have to." Then, the sharp crack of a single shot. Boone's eyes widened. He looked down, saw the wound bloom red across his chest. Behind him, Clara stood shaking, the smoking revolver still raised in her trembling hands. Boone stumbled once, twice, then fell into the dust. The air went still. Clara dropped the gun, breath ragged, tears mixing with dirt and rain. Elias limped toward her, his shadow long in the dying light. "You did what you had to," he said softly. Her voice broke. "He was right, Elias. My husband, he's alive. He sent them after me because I tried to leave. Because I couldn't live like that anymore." Elias nodded slowly. "Then you don't owe him a damn thing." She looked up at him, lost, fierce, alive. "What now?" Elias glanced toward the horizon. "Now, we finish this." The sun crawled low over the hills, bleeding red across the plains. Smoke still drifted from the ridge where Boone had fallen, curling up into the open sky like the ghost of everything that came before. Elias leaned against his horse, one hand pressed to his wound. The pain throbbed steadily, a reminder he was still breathing, though just barely. Clara stood a few paces away, staring down at the empty shells in the dirt. Her hands were shaking, her eyes hollow. "I killed him," she whispered. Elias looked at her, voice calm. "You saved us. There's a difference. But it don't feel like one," she said. He nodded. "It never does." The wind carried the scent of ash and sage. Elias knew they couldn't stay. Boone's men might have scattered, but others would come, men who didn't quit till the money stopped talking. He turned toward his horse, cinched the saddle tight. "We ride west," he said. "West?" Clara echoed. "Across the border. There's a town near Silver Mesa, quiet place, no law worth mentionin'. You'll be safe there." She frowned. "And you?" He looked past her, to the horizon glowing like a forge. "Got a few debts left to settle." Her voice trembled. "Elias, you can't go back there. You're hurt. You'll die." He gave her a faint smile. "They warned me about that already." Clara stepped closer, gripping his arm. "Don't joke. You said living ain't worth less, but I don't want you proving it that way." Elias looked at her, long and quiet. I ain't plannin' on dyin', Clara. Just finishin' what started. She wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her, that same steady fire that had carried him through every storm. She helped him mount, her hands gentle, eyes full of worry. Then she climbed up behind him, her arms wrapping around his waist. Together, they rode. The plains stretched endlessly under the dying sun. Coyotes howled from far ridges, and the wind whispered like old ghosts. Every mile took them deeper into a silence that felt heavier than the gun at Elias's side. They stopped at dusk near an abandoned watermill by a creek. Elias slid down stiffly, wincing as he pressed his side. The bleeding had slowed, but his strength was fading fast. Clara fetched water, tearing strips from her dress to clean the wound. You oughta rest, she said. He shook his head. Can't. He's close. Who? Your husband, Elias said, voice flat. Men like him don't quit. Boone might have been the muscle, but he was just the first wave. Clara's eyes darkened. Then let's keep ridin', Dot. Elias smiled faintly. You've got fight in you. I like that. As the night deepened, he stared into the small fire they'd built. Sparks lifted toward the stars, carried by the wind. You ever think how strange it is, he said softly, how love can turn a man into both a saint and a sinner? Clara looked at him across the firelight. Maybe love just shows what's already there. He smiled, slow and sad. Then I reckon I've been both for a while now. She reached across, her fingers brushing his. The touch was soft, hesitant, but real. You're not what they said you were, Elias. He met her eyes. What did they say? That you were born bad. That men like you don't change. He looked away, firelight flickering across his face. Maybe they're right. Maybe I just learned how to hide it better. Clara shook her head. No. I've seen what you are. You protect people, even when it costs you. That ain't bad. That's just human. For a moment, neither spoke. The night wrapped around them, full of the sounds of crickets and creek water. Elias leaned back, his hat low over his eyes. Get some sleep, he murmured. We move at first light. But sleep didn't come easily. Far off, through the trees, a lantern moved small, steady, deliberate. Then another. Clara stirred. Elias, she whispered. He opened his eyes, instantly alert. He followed her gaze, jaw tightening. They found us. He doused the fire with his boot, pulling her close. Mount up. Quiet now. They rode through the dark woods, the horses' hooves muffled by the earth. Behind them, faint voices called out, men tracking by lantern light, moving fast. Elias guided them toward a ravine he remembered from years back, narrow, hidden by rock and pine. By dawn, they reached the ridge above Silver Mesa. Below them stretched a small town, dusty streets, wooden signs, the faint sound of a church bell. It should have felt like salvation. But Elias saw the smoke trail rising from the hills beyond and knew better. He turned to Clara. They're already there. Her face went pale. What do we do? He looked toward the horizon, eyes hard. We finish it. Clara reached for his hand. You don't have to face him alone. Elias smiled faintly. I ain't alone, not anymore. And with that, they rode down the ridge toward Silver Mesa, toward the man waiting for them, and the final choice between vengeance and peace. The sun rose over Silver Mesa, New Mexico Territory, 1879, spilling gold over the rooftops of a town too small for the amount of sin it carried. Wooden signs creaked on their hinges. A stray dog nosed through the dust. The church bell tolled once, deep and hollow, like it knew the day would end in blood. Elias Crow rode in slow, his duster torn, his hat pulled low. Clara sat behind him, eyes scanning the empty street. The people who had been about their morning chores had already scattered, shutters closing, whispers rising. They knew the look of a man riding toward his fate. Elias reined in near the saloon, dismounted stiffly, and helped Clara down. He nodded toward the livery stable at the edge of town. Go there. Stay with the horses. She shook her head. I'm not hiding. He gave her a steady look. Ain't about hidin'. It's about survivin'. You'll need to tell the story when this is done. Her voice cracked. Don't talk like that. He rested a rough hand on her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear. Clara, I spent half my life running from what I was. This is where it stops. She caught his hand, holding it tight. Then I'll stop with you. He looked at her for a long, quiet moment, then leaned close, his voice barely above a whisper. You're stronger than me. That's how I know you'll keep living, no matter what happens. And with that, he turned, stepping into the street. The air was still. Every door and window was watched. Across the street, the doors of the Silver Mesa saloon swung open. A man stepped out, tall, sharp-suited, the kind of clean that doesn't belong in a dusty town. His hat was black felt, his eyes like chipped glass. He wore a pistol low and easy, like it was just another part of him. Clara gasped softly behind Elias. That's him, she said. Harlan. Elias nodded once. I figured. Harlan tipped his hat, voice smooth as a snake's hiss. Elias Crow. You sure took your time. Elias's voice was quiet, but it carried. Wasn't sure you were worth the ride. Harlan smiled thinly. You got my man Boone killed. My money burned. My wife was stolen. You're worth more dead than alive, but I ain't greedy. I'll settle for satisfaction. Clara stepped forward. You don't get to talk about me like property. Harlan didn't even glance at her. Darlin', everything's property to a man who earns it. Elias's hand twitched near his gun. You ain't earned a thing but what's comin'. Harlan chuckled. You think you can play hero now? You're no saint, Crow. You were a thief, a killer, a name whispered in wanted posters. You're filth who learned to ride upright. Elias's eyes hardened. Maybe. But I learned something you never will. Some things are worth dying for. Harlan spread his arms. Then come die for her. The silence cracked like ice. Both men stood still, the space between them drawn tight as a wire. The wind picked up, dragging dust between their boots. Elias's heart beat slow, steady. He remembered Clara's face, the way she looked when she first knocked on his door, scared, hurt, but still fighting to live. He remembered the words he'd spoken then, come warm by my fire. Now that same fire burned in him, and it was the only warmth he had left. Harlan's hand moved. The street exploded with sound. 2 shots, almost one. The recoil jolted through Elias's arm, the echo bouncing off the saloon walls. Harlan staggered, clutching his chest, his pistol dropping into the dust. He looked down at the blood spreading across his shirt, then up at Elias with disbelief. You were faster. Elias holstered his gun slowly. No, he said quietly. Just ready. Harlan fell backward into the dust, his hat rolling away. For a moment, the world was silent except for the soft wind through the street. Then Clara ran to Elias, throwing her arms around him. He winced, the strength finally leaving his legs. She caught him as he dropped to one knee, his breath ragged. You're hit, she whispered. He smiled faintly. I've been hit worse. No, you haven't, she said, tears streaming down her face. He looked past her toward the hills, the light turning gold again. Guess livin' was worth more than I thought. She held his face in her hands. Don't you dare die, Elias. He tried to answer, but his words came out soft, slurred. Don't. Plan to. He closed his eyes for a moment, not in surrender, but in peace. The kind a man earns only after years of runnin' finally end. The sheriff came soon after, quiet and grim. He looked at the bodies, then at Clara holding Elias close. He tipped his hat. Looks like Justice Dunn rode through town today. Clara nodded, her voice shaking. He wasn't justice. He was love. The sheriff said nothing more. By evening, Elias was resting in the back room of the saloon, patched up by the town's doctor. He drifted in and out of sleep, the pain fading under the soft hum of Clara's voice as she read by the lamp. When he finally opened his eyes, she smiled, tired, but alive. You came back to me, she whispered. He smiled weakly. Didn't have far to go. Outside, the night fell soft over Silver Mesa. The air smelled of rain and redemption. 3 days passed before Elias Crow could stand again. The bullet hadn't gone deep, though the doctor said it was a miracle it missed his heart. He didn't call it a miracle, he called it Clara. Silver Mesa had changed since that morning. The people came out of their homes again. The saloon swept the blood from the porch. The church bell rang softly, like it was saying goodbye to ghosts. Elias sat out on the porch of the small cabin on the town's edge, the same hat on his knee, a new dawn breaking before him. Clara brought him coffee, steam curling up into the chill air. She sat beside him, silent for a time. "Feels strange," she said at last. "The quiet." Elias smiled faintly. "Quiet's just peace waitin' to be believed." She looked at him. "You think we can have that?" He nodded slowly. "Reckon we already do." The horizon burned soft pink, light spilling over the hills. The wind carried the smell of wet sage and faraway rain, clean, honest, alive. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. "When I first knocked on your door," she whispered, "I never thought I'd find all this." He chuckled low. "When you knocked, I thought it was Death Callan. Guess we both got surprised." She smiled through her tears. "You could have walked away." Elias looked out at the world, eyes narrowing at the sunlight rising over the mesa. "I did enough walkin' away in my life. Figured it was time to stand for something. They sat there a while, the town waking below them, a horse's neigh, a hammer's rhythm, a mother calling her boy in for breakfast. Life had started again, quiet and small, but real. Elias's body was still weak, but his spirit was strong. He knew he'd carry scars not just from the bullets, but from the choices. Yet in the soft breath of morning, he finally understood. He hadn't been fightin' to live, he'd been fightin' to deserve livin'. Clara rose, brushing dust from her skirt. "The sheriff's lettin' us keep the place," she said. "Says a man who ends a blood feud earns his rest." Elias smirked. "Guess he ain't wrong." She turned, catching his gaze. "So what now?" He took a long sip of coffee, eyes on the horizon. "Now, we build. Maybe fix that fence, get a few horses. Maybe teach that kid from town how to shoot straight, without anger in his hands." She laughed softly. "That sounds like a plan." He leaned back, tipping his hat low. "Ain't much, but it's enough." And it was. Because love in the Old West wasn't built on promises or pretty words. It was forged in dust and danger, in long rides and longer silences. It was two souls who refused to let the world break what it didn't build. As the morning light spread across Silver Mesa, Elias reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small coin, old, worn smooth. He turned it in his fingers, thinking of all the choices that had led him here. "I once told a man livin' ain't worth less," he said quietly. "Didn't understand it then. But now I do. Livin' don't mean breathin', it means standin' for something you'd bleed for, even if the world calls you a fool." Clara smiled, eyes glistening. "Then you've lived, Elias Crow." He looked at her, a spark of that old outlaw fire still behind his calm. "Guess we both have." Elias took Clara's hand as they watched the sun climb higher. Life was never clean, never fair, but for once it was theirs. And that was enough. The wind whispered across the plains, carrying the last words of his story to the open sky. "Don't die for her," they warned. But he'd learned the truth the hard way. Some loves don't ask you to die. They teach you how to live. And somewhere beyond those dusty hills, the wind carried other tales. Of a cowboy who found a girl crying by the river and told her she ain't alone now. And of another who opened his door to a wounded woman and said, "Come warm by my fire." The West is full of stories like these, heart-scarred, healed, and reborn beneath the open sky. If you'd like to ride along for more, head over to the channel and hear the rest of them, where every sunset tells another story worth remembering.